Hi, my name is Amanda Waggoner, and my project is about mapping disadvantages in the Black community in Washington, D.C. For my WebGIS final project. So, a quick overview and introduction. This project is going to be examining media narratives within Black populations within Washington, D.C. And the main hypothesis was to determine whether or not Black media was covered, even though the population of Black people in DC is about 50%. And I wanted to look at this change to see like if a change in Black populations would also change in how media was um, relayed to Black populations in the area. And so what I used were newspapers to be examined as the main form of media, and I wanted to compare and contrast a local newspaper with a major national newspaper to see how each paper examines Black topics in the area. So the newspapers I used to examine were the Washington Post, which is a national newspaper, and the Prince of Popville, which is a locally based DC newspaper. So some of the questions that might come from this project to the from the audience is why is there focus in 2010 if this is supposed to be over time for this particular project? What is the Prince of Popville and why is this relevant? And so I aim to answer all of these things in the justification and relevance section, but I want to also give a quick summary and overview as to why I was interested in this project and why I chose to use this for this class. So the population of Washington, D.C. was about 70% Black, and around the civil rights movement going into the 1970s, it was essentially an area that had a lot of Black wealth, Black businesses, Black shops, etc. But it changed primarily due to gentrification. So whites became more of the predominant race in the area, and gentrification also changed the income dynamics of the area. So I wanted to look to see what that shift looks like within the last decade since gentrification has risen in DC from 2010 to 2019 or 2020. And since we're in 2020 right now, I kind of omitted that year. But there was a bit of a discrepancy with the 2019 data, so I will address that more in the challenges section of this presentation. But I wanted to examine that shift within this decade to see if any of the contributing factors between, gentrification changing in the NDC over time led to changes in media representation. So I chose the Prince of Popville because it's a local DC newspaper that has a lot of different DC contributors writing to it. It's kind of like a blog, but it's also like a newspaper at the same time. And um, I thought that it would have more press coverage in Black topics and primarily Black areas to see how I thought it would have more press coverage for Black topics in areas and neighborhoods that are more Black in DC rather than the Washington Post because it's become more of a political paper and they discuss a lot of different topics. So overall, the relevance for this project is to see how gentrification and population demographics are influenced by space and media. And I also thought that using this data and then hosting it on the web was an easier way of being able to give this data a home for people to go and look and research demographic changes and gentrification patterns because you can go online and then you can interact with the data on my website that I made. So I felt like it was an easier way to get this type of research out to the public. So before I go into some of the dynamics that I use to stylize and create my webpage and then the spatial analysis portion, I want to go a little bit into the backstory of how I categorized everything. So like I said, I had some challenges with the 2019 data. So I ended up focusing due to time constraints in 2010 only. And basically, with that, happening with only 2010 data, I had to scour through different articles within the Washington Post and the Prince of Popville and go back in time and then categorize topics that I felt were relevant or articles that touched on Black topics or Black people were mentioned in these topics. And I categorized them by arts, events, politics, crime, or anything that seemed miscellaneous. And then I also created a spreadsheet that had links of each article and a date attributed. So this project is also going to be, this project is also a part of my larger capstone project, which is going to go more in depth. But for this class, I decided to do a smaller scale presentation. So I only focused on the first week of February in 2010. And the reason why I focused in February is because that's Black History Month. So I wanted to see if there was any data that could contribute to being like any articles that contributed to being written around Black History Month, if there was any influx in more Black articles being written at that time or any like discrepancies in articles being written at that time. So I looked for articles that were within the first week of February in 2010 and in 2019. But like I said, I had issues with finding any data from the Washington Post for 2019, and the archives for the Washington Post apparently aren't free. So the free archives that I was able to get to were political data from 2010, and the Prince of Popville only contained 3 or 4 top articles that discussed Black topics within 2010 and 2019 around Black History Month. So I also wanted to show a quick sample of my code. This is just to show you how I organized everything. So the things that are highlighted are kind of the comments that I made and how I broke everything down. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to make a user interface that was really friendly and that was really interactive for the user to be able to read up on what this project's about, but also not have that distract from the spatial analysis portion of the project. So I organized the layout to have a layer list and a border container and tab container that had the layer list that was toggable on the left-hand side. And then I had 2 tile panes that were at the top of the map. So that way, one tile pane contained all the information and some links to the articles and what this data is about. And the other tile pane had a base map gallery. So that way those could be hidden after the user was done reading them so that it still wouldn't distract from the main map. And then I also added a search bar. So if they wanted to look up DC locations more and like see more of the areas that the articles hit on, they could do that as well. And I also added pop-ups and different attributes that people could look at when they're clicking on the layers in the map. So this is just a sample of the code that shows how this text was broken down to like each section, each widget, each part of the code was created. So web map organization, like I kind of said in the last slide, I created a interface that contained some like a sidebar and a panel that had the layers, and each of the layers symbolized with sublayers, opacity, so they could change the symbology of the layers or turn the layers on and off when they're looking at the article data. And then the base map gallery. These are just examples of what I was talking about and how it looks on the interface when I do the demo. And then I wanted to make a concise color palette that made sense and just that looked all around nice for the user when they're researching or when they're reading the data and they want to know more about it. And this is a picture of just what the application looks like. So you see in the middle of the map, there's DC segmented by ward, and then I use census tract data to get the population of Black people within each ward. And so that's symbolized by color. So the darker colors show more Black populations within the section, the tracks within each ward. And then there are the dots that show the articles. So there are 2 different layers. One layer is containing or three different layers. One layer is containing just the Washington Post data. The other layer is containing just the Prince of Popville data, and then one layer is a mixture of all the articles together and what areas they're from. And then the user can click on each of those pop-ups and get the article, a link, the topic, what category was put in, where it was located, or where the article was written at, or what place the article was discussing. So I'm going to do a quick demo. Let me get to here. Okay, so this is the web mapping application, and once you click on it, you can see that this layer is a count of the articles alone. So you can click on the articles and zoom in. So this is just showing you in proportion to the location where the articles are located. So this larger circle is showing that there were 15 articles that the Washington Post had that were in proximity to the White House. And then the three smaller articles were showing that they were just in other locations in DC, that these articles are from the Prince of Popville. And then if you turn the count articles off, you can get the Washington Post layers. So these are all articles that were discussing political data, and it has a link that you can go to the article and the location and the day that it was written and what it was talking about. And then this is the Prince of Popville data, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. So there were only 3 articles that I found that really discussed Black topics within that area and within 2010. And so the yellow dots are showing miscellaneous data, like articles that didn't really have a topic. And then the one in the red is showing art, an article that was discussing art. And if you click on that data as well, it'll pop up with a link to the article, the topic, and the location. And then you have census tract polygons that you can see, and these don't have pop-ups because I figured the user can see like these are talking about Black population, and so you can see the range of population symbolized already. And then once you overlay where the articles are in proximity to the Black population, so if you zoom into Ward 2, you can see that a lot of the articles are written around the White House and that it has the lowest Black population within this tract. So to go back to what my hypothesis was saying, the Washington Post is actually talking about President Obama, but the area that it's focusing on, or the topic of the location of what the article was focusing on, doesn't contain that many Black people in the area. So is it really being distributed to Black people? Versus the articles in the Prince of Popville, one of them is talking about Ward 7. It is directly talking about Black people, but it's in one of the most densely populated areas in Ward 7 with a lot of Black people in that area. So that's actually an article that's being catered towards Black people. And then if you zoom out, like I said, you can also change the base map. So I have the base map drop down, just in case, the user wanted a prettier base map to look at, or something that was easier to identify with. And then this is also it's a tile pane, so you can turn it off. And then also there's an About Me section that talks about what the project's containing. And then there's links to each article and the GIS data that I used. And then there's also a search bar, so you can type in the White House and it would come up. And so now you can get a bigger overview of like, oh, hey, this is exactly where the White House is. And these are where all these articles are, just in case someone wanted to look that up or like look up areas in BC. So yeah, that's a brief overview of the um, web application. And then going back to my presentation. So yeah, I just wanted to do a quick overview of the challenges. Like I said, that the challenges were mostly from the archival content from the Washington Post was not readily accessible for 2019, and a lot of the 2010 data was really hard to find because some of the sections in the paper are out of date now, and they're not within the recent paper, so some of the archives are gone. And some of them cost money. So for my capstone project, when I want to kind of go deeper into this, I'm probably going to contact the Washington Post in order to get the archival content. And the Prince of Popville was better organized, but rarely contained Black topics, which I thought was interesting as well. So yeah, that's just a quick overview of my project. Thank you so much.